Welcome to another episode of the Good Listening To Show, your life and times with me, Chris Grimes, the storytelling show that features The Clearing, where all good questions come to get asked and all good stories come to be told, and where all my guests have two things in common. They're all creative individuals and all with an interesting story to tell. There are some lovely storytelling metaphors, a clearing, a tree, a juicy storytelling exercise called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, some alchemy, some gold, a cheeky bit of Shakespeare, and a cake. So it's all to play for. So yes, welcome to the Good Listening To Show, your life and times with me, Chris Grimes. Are you sitting comfortably? Then we shall begin. Oh, yes, indeed. How seamless was that? So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another very exciting episode of the Good Listening To podcast, your life and times with me, Chris Grimes. And I'm delighted to have here in my old Zoom hole and in the clearing, where all good questions come to get asked, that you find, and all good stories come to get told, the very lovely, bearded, majestic, awesome pants that is Matt Georges, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, thank you, Chris. It's nice to be in your Zoom hole.
And thank you for riffing on that with me too. It's a pleasure to have you in my Zoom hole, as they say. We'll both be relieved to know that the whole podcast is not called Welcome to My Zoom Hole, but thank you for indulging me. So yes, you had me, we did our own live version of your podcast last week, and this is by way of reciprocity. Matt Georges, ladies and gentlemen, is an environmental economist. He's on a cheeky bit of gardening leave at the moment and is setting up his own business in being a consultant in the same terrain, I'm imagining. Is that the case?
It is, yeah. So the new company I launched only yesterday, the day before, called Orbital Economics. And I mean, it's me, let's be honest about this. I just do environmental economics work, which is essentially trying to work out the value of the environment and the best way to protect it.
And indeed, you have had an illustrious career as a very, very strategically important individual within the Environment Agency, advising the government. You know, and I was following you on LinkedIn for quite some time. I will riff more about how I know you as well, because you were very kind and generous. Many, many years ago, it was 2006. I was doing a sort of facilitative day for a company I used to be a part of called Barking Productions, and you were a delegate at an Environment Agency event. And we got on quite well. I was doing actor role play with you and facilitating, and then you then knew that I was making a short film called Knock Knock, and you decided of your own volition, because I needed help, because it was calling in as many favours as I could. You took 2 unpaid days leave in order to come and be a runner on my film.
Yes, I did. It was so much fun as well, actually. Clearing up fake sick. I remember I enjoyed that quite a lot. But no, it was fantastic. Just being part of something that creative and energizing. You know, everybody there was very much up for it, and it was good fun. Yeah.
And indeed, I've forgotten about that. Of course, there was the need to get you to do all the glamorous jobs very, very quickly. So thank you for reminding me that we did have sick in a stairwell. If you want to watch Knock Knock, it's a dark comic short about an addict with a difference and a dealer with a twist. I have riffed about it on Facebook and a little bit in the podcast space as well. But anyway, Matt Georges was very, very lovely, because he did, of his own volition, just volunteered to help. And I'm very grateful to you for that. And then our paths have crossed. You know, we've known about each other on LinkedIn. And indeed, recently you got back in touch because you wanted to ask me, and I was very flattered, if I'd be in your podcast called Serendipity Soup.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is where the serendipity comes in, isn't it? Because, you know, 16 years ago, weirdly, it was 16 years to the day when we did the interview, because it came up on your phone, didn't it? And you know, I'd only done that because I was interested in what you were doing and found you entertaining and of great value. So I thought, well, I'd like to be involved with somebody with this kind of energy. And so we did Knock Knock. And then, as you say, every so often we kind of bumped into each other again. And then through LinkedIn, I saw that you'd moved into other areas, like your coaching work, especially. I went to see you do your improv show, Instant Wit, which I loved. And so we were saying, weren't we, that we kind of keep bouncing, you know, there might be a few years in between, but we kind of keep bouncing back together again. And so I saw your podcast and I listened to the one that you did with your dad, which was so good. It was very empathetic and very well done. And Your dad's he's a great character, isn't he? He's a lovely fellow. And so I thought, oh, I wonder if Chris would come on my podcast, because I know your podcast is much bigger than mine if we're comparing sizes.
No, not necessarily.
So without getting too phallic about the whole thing, I was a bit worried, but you've been so generous, and you came on and we had a really good natter, basically.
Well, our combined philosophy in life, mine is to say yes more because of my comedy improvisational love of the mindset. Yes, and so of course I'm going to say yes. And also, this whole new terrain of podcasting for me is fairly new. I know it is for you too. And just to blow a tiny bit of smoke straight back at you, I thought Serendipity Soup had a really interesting premise to it. So do you want to just tell us a bit about Serendipity Soup?
Yeah, well, the idea came to me when a few years ago, maybe a year or two ago, it must have been pre-pandemic, we had one of those kind of motivational talks from a guy who was in not the SAS, but the SBS, the Special Boat Service, which is the Navy's equivalent of the kind of commandos. And he was everything that you might imagine, a very kind of Bear Grylls character, where they do that understated, yeah, so, jumped out the plane, broke all my legs, but, it's all fine. And it was a bit like, okay. And what interested me, though, was that he was saying, so this was a success tour, but by his own admission, only about 5% of the people who go through whatever, goodness knows what they have to go through to get into the Special Forces group, only 5% of them make it. And yet, these aren't like you and me off the street. These are already trained soldiers. And then they're going this other level up, and only 5% of them make it. And I was thinking, what lesson has that really got for all of us? And the more I thought about it, and I asked him that, which was a bit of a terrifying question, but he didn't get it. He didn't understand where I was coming from. And I suppose what I was interested in was what happens to the 95% of people who go for this, who presumably worked just as hard as he did, dreamed just as big as he did, but didn't make it. Because that's kind of like most of us, isn't it? We all have big dreams. I wanted to play football for England, that didn't happen. And we all have big dreams, but most of us don't make it. And so this is the idea of the antidote to the Celebrity Success podcast, which is, well, most of us don't have this career that kind of, all right, there's some bumps, but eventually you reach this kind of promised land. Most of us are kind of bouncing around all over the place and making it up as we go along. So I really wanted to speak to people who'd had that kind of experience. And you're a great example of that, Chris, with all the different ways that you kind of riff off this sort of central idea that you have of kind of what you want to do, but then it kind of flips out into all these different career paths that are kind of really interesting. So lots of people like that, really, that I like talking to, and I find it fascinating.
And it's this notion, as we all know from experience and hindsight, success is something that's relative. It ebbs and flows, it changes, it evolves, it changes. And, we were talking about this, and again, you were very generous in the space that you created within your podcast, but we were sort of riffing on the theme of life being a wicked mess and how it's pretty chaotic, and we expect the sort of linear progression of a graph of career trajectory to just be a straight line, but it's sort of a big bowl of spaghetti that's blipped on the floor because we've been all over the shop. But the good news is we're the right way up today, which is the important thing.
Well, for now we are, Chris. Yeah, which is all you can really ask for, isn't it?
As you know, also, Matt, I'm pulling what we're talking about into the UK health radio space as well. And I hope you don't mind me just mentioning, but you're free to riff on this as much or as little as you like. You've also had your own relationship to mental health over your adult life as well. Again, that's relatable to me. I'm 59 next week, but when I was 42, really? I like you. You think?
Yeah, okay.
Remember the joke? I don't look 59, do I? You did once. No, but you're being very kind. But I say it's relatable because I think I even mentioned in your podcast, when I was 42, I had my year of the Wibble when I was more anxious than I ever remember being in all of my life. And so my relationship to mental health is, I'm attuned very acutely when people say they're anxious, because I now know what that feels like. We don't have to major on that, but this is just a lovely invitation and an invocation to go wherever you want. And reconnecting with you, I was very struck with, as a fellow wonderfully emotionally intelligent human being, you two've got a really interesting story to tell. And the universal truth within what I'm trying to achieve is all my guests have two things in common, and you eminently qualify for that, is that, it's creative individuals with an interesting story to tell. And indeed, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I must admit, I was slightly terrified by that, that introduction that in with the music at the beginning, and it's saying creative person with a fantastic story to tell. And I was thinking, oh, I'm going to have to up my game here, aren't I?
And the idea also is that everyone's got an interesting story to tell if you give them a good listening to. And I promise you, this is going to be a really delightful episode because of that. So if I may, I'm going to then bounce you along now the storytelling metaphors of the Good Listening To show. We're going to talk about a clearing. We're going to talk about a tree, where you've been kind enough to think about the apples that we're going to shake out of the tree. This is your responses to the 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise. We've got a squirrel in there, and then we've got some alchemy, some gold, a cheeky bit of Shakespeare, and a cake. So it's all to play for. Hurrah.
Lovely, lovely, lovely.
And feel free, by the way, at the very end, there'll be a deliberate invitation to go, tell us specifically where to go to look out for the Serendipity Soup podcast as well, because it really is a very worthwhile listen, I think, as well. So let's get you going. So what is a clearing like for you, Matt Georges, environmental economist and podcaster? Where do you go to get clutter-free, inspirational and able to think?
Yeah, so I thought about this, and I'm afraid I'm quite a literal person. I thought your dad had a much better response to this question, but I do go to nature. And years and years ago, I was listening to a lady called Solitaire Townsend, who is the chief exec of a company called Quay, who do environmental and climate change communications work. And Solitaire is fantastic. For a start, she gave us a talk and said, with a name like Solitaire, I could only work in PR and comms. And so you think, well, bless her, she's that kind of self-deprecating humor is very good. But she asked a question. She said to her audience, close your eyes for a second and imagine you're somewhere peaceful, somewhere calm, somewhere where you can be yourself and just take some time. And then she said, okay, everybody open your eyes now. Now, can you put your hand up if the place that you were imagining was man-made? Nobody did. Everybody had imagined a place in nature. Obviously, different places. Somebody had been on the beach, someone was in a forest, but it was all, literally 100% of the audience had imagined a natural place. And that says a lot about the importance, and obviously this was the point she was making, the importance of the environment and nature to us as humans. And so, yeah, when you talk to me about what's my clearing, where do I go? I'm very, very lucky. I live reasonably close to the River Thames, so I walk along the river. And it's a very, very peaceful, well, that's not quite true. During the summer, it's not peaceful at all. But it's nice seeing other people enjoying that environment too, even if they are being pretty loud and drunk about it. At least they're having fun and they're enjoying nature and they're being in it. So that's where I go. I walk down by the river.
Lovely. So we're talking about a very specific stretch of tributary of the Thames. So if you want to name where the geography is, I'm going to turn up with a tree in your clearing in a moment.
Oh, okay. So we're down by Teddington Lock, which for this might appeal to you. For Monty Python fans, is where there's a tiny building that they did a sketch, which I've never seen, but I've been told that there's a sketch because Teddington Lock has this tiny building that's, it's about as wide as my shoulders, and yet it's a perfect little house. And obviously Monty Python got really obsessed, the guys got really obsessed with this place and based an entire sketch around it. So a little bit of comedy history for you.
Wonderful. Is this the fish slap with Michael Palin and I think it was probably Eric Idle bouncing up and then slapping each other with a fish and then one of them falls into the lock?
Yeah, I think it was, yeah.
I love that. So can we're there with next to Michael Palin in the fish slap. I love that.
Oh, that would be nice. I would like to see that, yeah.
Wonderful. There's just a lovely skip and a dance and then a slap with a fish and one of them goes plop into the Teddington Lock, which is just great. So there we are. I'm now going to arrive with your tree, to shake your tree now to see which storytelling apples fall out. So you've been very kind also to think about 4 things that have shaped you, 3 things that inspire you, 2 things that never fail to grab your attention. And this is where my squirrel comes in, borrowed from the film Up. It's a bit, oh, squirrels, what never fails to grab your attention. And then a quirky or unusual fact about you, Matt George's environmental economist, until you tell us. You don't have to keep majoring on the work side of stuff, by the way. I just keep mentioning the title to remind listeners who we're listening to.
That's
So
all right.
there's a deliberate invitation to go as deep as you like, wherever you like, but over to you to shake your tree and crunch on your storytelling apples.
So are we starting here with things that have shaped me? Is that where I start?
Yes, if you like doing it in that linear way, 4 things that have
Yeah, well, I am a bit of a stickler for the rules on these things. So I'm one of those people, if you give me the instruction, I will follow it. So you've said start with 4, so I will start with 4. So things that have shaped me, as you say, you gave me a bit of time to have a think about this, but not too long. So I did my best just to kind of just see what popped up on top of my brain. And the 4 things that came up were probably were linked to the fact, so I have a weekly therapy session, which is to help me, as you say. I had, I guess you'd call it a breakdown. It was never diagnosed as such, but I just kind of hit the wall 10 years ago, actually. It was coming up to 10 years ago, Christmas 2011. And there were lots and lots of different reasons for that. Some of them work related, some of them home related, and it all kind of turned into a big old mess. And I was, after that, diagnosed with moderate depression, which is slightly scary because it makes you wonder what on earth severe depression might look like. But anyway, and I've recovered over time with a lot of help from the NHS and a lot of help from my wife, especially, who's had to put up with an awful lot from me and has done and has helped me. But yeah, so I get therapy, and the therapy is there to kind of help me work through some of these things. So the things that it's kind of helped me work through are really around a lot of the stuff from when I was younger, which you'd expect. So what has shaped me? My school shaped me, the school I went to. So I went to Birkenhead School, which is a private school on the Wirral, which is kind of Merseyside near Liverpool for people who don't know. And it's quite an odd place. The Wirral is very divided. You can draw a line kind of down the middle of this peninsula, and on one side you have some very, very wealthy parts, and on the other you have some of the most deprived communities in the country. And so there's a big element there of fitting in. So if you're walking down a pavement wearing a private school uniform in Birkenhead, you've got to be kind of reasonably aware of your surroundings and who's around you and what they might do. And so and within the school itself, I think I would liken the school to a kind of milder version of a prison, in the sense that there was always the immediate threat of physical violence from other lads, basically.
From other inmates.
From other inmates, yeah. Now, and so a lot of the stuff that I'm unlearning now is stuff that I learned at that school, which is how do you protect yourself and get around in an environment like that. So I'm not a particularly strong person, I'm quite slim. I was thin, even, a bit of a beanpole when I was at school. So physical force wasn't an option. And so the way that I coped with that was a kind of mixture of fading into the background and also making friends, so and also the kind of classic is it gamma wolf, alpha, beta and gamma,
Yes.
where it's the use of humor is a very good way of kind of getting around those sorts of situations. So there was quite a lot of that.
That's very relatable, by the way. I had a similar did you call it gamma wolf? That's a lovely way to not go for the alpha, but appease the alpha. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think that's what I might have got the phraseology
No,
wrong, but that's where I'm going with it. Yeah,
that's where I've taken it, because I had an appeasing of the alpha wolf, because on day one of a new school next to a holly bush, they said, you're either going to make me laugh or you're going in the holly bush. And I believe I literally wet myself and that made them laugh. And so it sort of achieved the same thing.
Chris.
It was a little bit of we came out squit. I can laugh about it now, but I think that sort of bit of spontaneity pulled me through.
Wow.
Awkward. But anyway, related.
Yeah,
Certainly.
Jesus. Yeah, no, we had a holly bush as well, I'll be honest, I ended up in the holly bush, but I also put other people in the holly bush, so
Okay.
I wasn't quite at the bottom of the pile, if you like. But yeah,
But I love the idea also of the sort of sense to be able to swim to the middle somewhere, so you don't stick out, but you don't get invisible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that's a really good point. That if you're too much of a nerd, then you kind of stick out in the wrong way, and if you kind of try and get too close to the light, if you like, then you're like
yes. And by the way, nowadays I've heard, and again this is me speaking Ute vernacular, a nerd is called a gorm. So
right.
And I only know that not because my son is one, but because he's at school of the age now where he's 14, where if you are a gorm, that's how you stick out in the nerd world.
Right. Gosh. Okay. No, I hadn't heard that one yet, but thanks for keeping me up to date.
In the
Ute with the street. Yeah, that's good. So school shaped me a lot. I mean, I've painted a fairly bleak picture there, but there were good sides to it too. But yeah, I suppose there's just a lot to unpack from that experience, and that has definitely shaped me a lot, which is what you asked.
Yes, and indeed, then reading between the lines, is that where the therapy really majored in unpicking some of the school, for want of a better word, damage that did, and you're trying to unpick that?
There's an element of that. Yeah. I think there is. There's an element of not exposing your vulnerability.
Yeah.
And actually, if you don't expose your vulnerability and you keep that hidden and kind of squashed down, then if you're feeling hurt and you don't express it, then it can kind of come out in odd ways. And this is what happened to me. So the therapy I do is anger management therapy. Wow. because if I'm hurt by something, then I generally just kind of pretend it hasn't happened, but it kind of fills up like a bucket, and eventually the bucket overflows, and it tends, unfortunately, to overflow. It doesn't happen at work because I'm busy being professional. It happens at home when I snap at my wife because she has I don't know, I think of any petty excuse to have an argument and I will have done it, and my wife will have been left there thinking, where did that come from?
Yes.
So yeah, I'm having to just kind of soften up a bit, basically.
And I love the notion there of the idea of the dripping tap of overwhelm. It's just a drip, a drip, a drip, but the cup or the vessel will overflow. So that's very honest of you. So I really admire you for that. That's what it is there, trying to unpick and help you with.
Yeah. So there's that, and then there's my parents. Obviously, shaped me an awful lot, and especially my dad. And again, there's some very positive things about my dad, some more negative things as well. But it was his death probably 10 years ago that was one of the main catalysts for the depression that I fell into. Again, not to say too much, because it's just more about him than it is about me. But I did his eulogy. I felt like I should do his eulogy at his funeral. And if I'm honest, when I started, I couldn't think of anything positive to say about him. And that sounds awful. But I think I was just so angry that he'd gone, and I kind of blamed him for dying, which is obviously a relatively harsh response. But what changed that, and I think this is why I wanted to do the eulogy, was I started reading some of the cards that had started pouring into my mum and dad's home, And so many of them were so kind and so positive about him. And the word that kept coming up time and time again was that he was a gentleman. You know, which even 10 years ago was quite an old-fashioned phrase for people to use. But I know what they meant by it. He was he fought for the underdog. He was a very strong believer in justice, and fairness, and things being done right, you know. And so reading what other people had written about him gave me the kind of tools to start to talk about my relationship with my dad a bit more, and what he meant to me.
So external perspective gave you more of a sense of, I suppose, balance and the middle ground between your own anger and what others thought.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the issue was that my dad died of lifestyle illnesses, diabetes, high blood pressure, that kind of thing. And so I kind of blamed him for that. And yet it's clear to me now, looking back, that he had his own demons, if you like, to deal with.
How old was he, if you don't mind me asking? And I'm just interested in your own
was,
parallel universe and how old you are now and comparatively.
Well, he was 62 when he died, which is not old in my view, certainly not nowadays in the UK. He had his first heart attack when he was 46.
Crikey.
Yeah. So I'm 42 now. And so, yeah, there's a lot there still to deal with. He was a very complicated man, and our relationship was very complicated. But just as with my school, I got lots and lots of positive things out of there, but also some negative ones as well.
And also reading between the lines, are you an only child, or have you got siblings that also went to university? Sorry, to boarding school as well?
Oh, it wasn't a boarding school; it was a day school. But no, it's fine. I have a younger brother who's 2.5 years younger than me, who also had a very bad time at that school. Actually, sorry, maybe we should edit that bit out. That's not fair. That's for him to say. But there we go. Anyway.
Sure. Okay. That's probably my fault for digging a bit deeper there, just into whether you were an only child in experiencing the adversity of school or not. Sure. Okay. Still in the shapeages of what shaped you, and thank you for being so searingly honest, by the way. This is really fascinating.
Oh, that's okay. Well, the last one is maybe a bit more positive one. It's my family history shaped me a lot. So, like most families, every so often somebody will, especially a retired person, will get a bit of a bee in their bonnet, and they'll do some digging. They'll do kind of like, who do you think you are sort of version. And on our family, so part of my family is Greek Cypriots, so there's some very interesting stuff around there. But the side of my family that fascinates me quite a lot is the Welsh side of my family. So my mum speaks Welsh. She is Welsh, basically. We dug into the Welsh side of the family, and they start out in a place in Cornwall, actually, as copper miners in a place called Skinner's Bottom, which appealed to me immensely. But then they moved. They moved from Cornwall to South Wales, so coal mining in South Wales, and then they moved again up to Flintshire for the slate mines in Flintshire.
You sound like the original Poldarks or something like that.
Yeah,
mining, but copper mining. Lovely.
That's it. Yeah. Well, but I don't look quite as good with my top off, unfortunately. But yeah, other than that, it's pretty much the same story. And but what I liked about that story was that because I grew up, like I say, on the Wirral, where I went to a private school, it's very hard to fit in. I'm not really from anywhere. I mean, I could say I'm from the Wirral, but you can hear from my accent that, the first thing people say, I say, where are you from? And I say Liverpool because it's easier. People know where Liverpool is. First thing everybody says, without fail, oh, you haven't got an accent. And of course I don't. But nevertheless, I was born and brought up there. But so I didn't really feel like I belonged anywhere. And then I was chatting to my mum about this, saying, well, the family, they're going this way, that way, they're going all over the place. And she said, well, yeah, that's what our family does. And suddenly I realized where I did belong, which was with my family, always moving, but as part of this kind of great history, going back hundreds of years of our family kind of doing that thing, moving from Cyprus, from Wales, from Cornwall, wherever.
And when you said going this way, that way, I think we were going to go over the Irish Sea there, or this way, that way, forwards and backwards over the. But
Yeah, probably.
I love the constancy that you described. The family moves a lot, but there's a constancy of family, and indeed the constancy of your family. You've been very generous towards, how you've had help from your partner, particularly, your wife through your depression and everything. So there's a constancy which I think you're returning to in terms of family.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's it sounds cheesy, but I suppose, how close am I to my family? I see some of them probably not as close as some families are, but I do have that real sense of being, I guess, part of a dynasty in a sense. It's not like a formal dynasty with portraits and a grand crumbling manor or anything, but it's, there's a history there. It's my history, and I feel embedded in it, which is a lovely feeling. Feels comforting.
And it's lovely that there is a sense of belonging in that. You're at the heart of something, which is lovely too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's good to have that. And I would like to, maybe when I'm older and I have a bit more time, I would like to do a bit more digging on that side of things and find out a bit more about my relatives.
So I think we've come to the end of the shapeages, and now we're going to think about, and if there's any overlap, don't worry about that either, but three things that inspire you now.
Yeah, well, I think going back to what I was saying when we started talking about not, something that really inspires me is the energy I get off other people. So if I'm just sat by myself, I suppose I have a tendency, if I'm not careful, to kind of start to circle downwards, and the way, so my wife and I had, this was a source of tension for quite some time before we suddenly realized what the issue was. So my wife likes to relax by sitting on the sofa. She may have a glass of wine. She may not. I'm not going to kind of put that stereotype out there. And she watches whatever she wants to watch without me tutting about how shit it is. Sorry, can we swear? Is that all right?
That's fine. We can't. That's pretty fine. Not a worry.
So yeah, she watches whatever she wants to watch without me tutting and huffing and being generally annoying to her. And when I want to relax, I go out with my friends. I'm not talking about going mental. I'm just talking about talking. I go out and so for a while, when we both wanted to relax, I was like, well, why don't we go out? Let's do something. She's like, oh, I don't really want to. And I get really frustrated with her. And similarly, she was like, well, you're supposed to be tired. Why on earth would you want to go out? Because that's exhausting to her. To speak to people for that long is exhausting. Whereas for me, it recharges my batteries. And then one day, I don't know how we came across it, we suddenly realized that this was what the issue was.
You're both trying to relax, but in a different way. Yes.
Exactly right. So the energy is, the relaxation, the energy from other people, just hearing about what they're doing. And I think that's part of the reason for the podcast is just me getting my fix. I talk to people and I'm allowed to ask questions. I'm allowed to be a bit nosy because of the setup there. They've agreed. And obviously I'm not going to kind of, I'm not a tabloid journalist. I'm not going to kind of dig, but I'm just like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. And I get the energy off it.
And there's a definite synergy in both of our desire to do that. It's about your version of giving somebody a good listening to is for the serendipity side. And mine is, it came about because I love coaching being about giving somebody a good listening to, so that they're all related. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I think really the podcast that I do is about me learning as much as anything else. I'm as you say, I'm kind of just at a point in my career where I'm not quite sure where I'm going. I'm setting up my own company. That might work, it might not, who knows? But what I'm finding is that a lot of the people that I've spoken to on my podcast all had nuggets of information. I thought, oh God, that's good. That's really useful. And so for me, yeah, it's as much about learning from my own point of view as anything else.
And 42, by the way, as you know, I'm sure you know, is a wonderfully well, it's an age of transition. I know this with hindsight, but the company I co-run, Second Curve, is this idea we're all on a curve or a trajectory, but as your curve wanes, what do you do to attach to your second curve? And the beginnings of a decade or towards the end of a decade, or indeed in the middle of a decade, you can always identify why you might be feeling a bit meh, and what's next is what's really profound. So the fact you're being really brave in working out what to do next is a wonderful, emotionally intelligent way to connect to your next curve, whatever that's going to be.
Yes, well, this is it. You see, this is the concept that you came up with when I was interviewing you, and I thought, oh, that's good. I'll have that, and it goes in the brain, and yeah, the idea of a second curve, I love that. Yeah, because I definitely felt that my previous role, much as I enjoyed it, was kind of running out of steam a bit. My curve was going a bit flat there.
Yes.
And it was time to kind of maybe reinvigorate and try something new, but I didn't know what that new was yet. Still not sure. Yeah, so other things that inspire me, these are a bit maybe less interesting or less kind of emotionally deep, but I get very inspired by new technologies, and I love the new. And I'm kind of less interested in status technologies, so somebody produces a new pair of trainers or a new iPhone, I'm like, okay, but something really clever and interesting and new. So I remember the first time that I saw an iPod. So one of my friends who works in tech, he was like, it's been out for 3 weeks in Japan, where's yours? That kind of thing. And, which is a quote from Nathan Barley. So my friend is not as much of a dickhead as Nathan Barley. Anyway, he said, look, this is this new thing, and I picked it up, and it was so beautiful, so beautifully designed, and I could use it instantly.
Wow. Yes.
And I thought, wow. And I even said to him, this is incredible. So I'm miming the thumb going round on the iPod for those who remember it. Such a beautiful invention. Now, as an environmentalist, I kind of, oh my God, all this kind of tech and waste electronic equipment, but I can't help myself. I just love the ingenuity that's gone into something like that. And even recently, no, it can't have been recently because it must have been pre-COVID, I went to a conference in Telford, and I made sure that I stayed in a little B&B in a place called Ironbridge. And Ironbridge, for those who don't know, is essentially seen as the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. And it's named after the first arch that was built across the River Severn there. And it was amazing to be there. And again, as an environmentalist, the Industrial Revolution is a harbinger of utter damage to the environment. But yet the ingenuity and the beauty of this structure still there after 250 odd years.
By the way, your sound cut out just as you were saying. It commemorated, well, Ironbridge is where the first iron bridge was industrially constructed. Is that what you said?
Yes, sorry. Yeah. So Ironbridge is the place where literally the first iron bridge was built. And like I say, yeah, it's the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution for most historians anyway. I think you could probably make an argument for Cornwall. But
I remember it because of my period in history, back at school doing the Industrial Revolution.
Of course.
So, of course. I did the French Revolution to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It was. So it's all 1789 to 1850, I think, was my period.
Oh, right. Gosh, that's very specific, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Fascinating time, though. But I mean, that brings me to my other kind of inspiration, which is maybe it's a bit too connected, but I love beautiful architecture. I love beautiful buildings. And I remember I was walking back from a night out in Bristol, which is where I went to university and where I lived for a long time as well. And as you know, it's an amazing city. And I was walking through a kind of place up in Clifton, which is kind of better off part of the city. And I said to a friend of mine, kind of relatively drunkenly, I said, God, you're looking at these beautiful buildings. So they're a bit like the kind of sandstone, beautiful Cotswold sandstone buildings that you get in Bath. And I said, God, don't you just get a feeling of peace and contentment? And he looked at me like I was completely mad. He said, it's just some houses. And I was like, no, it's not. And I get that a lot. Even in my dreams, I get dreams about amazing, complex architecture that's not there, And I love it. I love what people can do.
I love that the buildings give you a soul chime, whereas your friend was completely oblivious to that. I love that.
I didn't get it. Yeah, a soul chime. That's great. Yeah, it was a soul chime. And I couldn't explain that feeling to him. I was just saying, I just feel really at peace here.
I need to lick this bridge. Like this is...
Yeah, I need to definitely kind of rub my hands over it, and of course it belongs to somebody else, so that's not allowed. But I was like, this feels great. And you're right, he had no idea what I was talking about. There you go. Anyway, maybe a lot of people don't, but the soul chime idea, I've come across that, but I've forgotten about it. Yeah, that was exactly what it was.
We could now be at the two things that never fail to grab your attention, if I'm getting my maths right in a construct I'm driving you through. So what are your squirrels that never fail to get Matt George's attention?
Well, there's two. Well, because that's what you asked me to produce, so there's two. One is a bit more deeper than the other, but I'll start with the shallower one, which is that living in Britain, I'll tell you what really grabs my attention is when the sun shines, especially if it's a rainy day, and then you know how it is when the clouds pass over and the sun shines, and everyone's like, oh, it's not just me. This is a very British thing, that as though we've never seen it before. It's, oh, yeah. And then I might go outside. I might do that actually. And it's like, oh, there's a bit of sunshine. So I love getting that. And I know it's a cliche, but I'm looking out the window now, Chris, and it is great. Have you ever seen Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs?
No, it's been on in the background when I've walked through. I probably need to go and watch it, don't I?
It's great. It's very, very well done. And there's a bit, hopefully, spoiler alert here, but hopefully it's not too bad. Right at the end, whatever kind of dread cloud has enveloped the earth is sucked back into the machine. And so they show all these kind of landmark places like, the Eiffel Tower or the Taj Mahal or New York or whatever. And then they do the Houses of Parliament, and this orange cloud disappears, and underneath it is just a grey cloud. And I thought that was spot on. For an American comedy, that was perfect. So yeah, that's one thing that I always grabs my attention. If a grey day and suddenly you get a ray of sunshine, that's lovely. And the other one is I've got very interested in random acts of kindness, and there's two that so the basis of this has been what floats to the top of my brain soup, if you like, and there's two incidents that kind of bubble to the top. One is years and years ago, I worked in a company that was based in Brixton, and Brixton wasn't as bad as it had been, but it wasn't as trendy as it is now. It was kind of somewhere rough around the edges in between. And there's a big road junction there, and a police car was driving across there. And what had been happening, the traffic had been kind of going around. Somebody had just left half the front of their car in the middle of this traffic. Like, it was the bumper, but also with extra bits, and it was just kind of there in the middle of the road, and everyone had just been driving around it and just kind of causing all sorts of chaos. And this police car kind of pulled over, and then this copper got out, and he kind of picked his way through the traffic, picked this thing up, and just put it on the side of the road. And I thought to myself, it sounds small, doesn't it? But I thought to myself, you didn't have to do that. It's not your job to do that. You're a policeman in Brixton. Your job is to kind of avoid being stabbed, that kind of thing. But he didn't. This was a small thing. It didn't take him long, and anyone could have done it, but he did it.
Yes.
And it just improved things for everybody else.
So he was a pillar of the community, as the police should be. As the
police should be, yeah. I appreciate there's some, I don't want to particularly go down this road, but I'm white, and I'm looking at the police in a particularly privileged way that maybe many other residents of Brixton then and now don't. I get that. But the act itself, it happened to be a copper who did it. It could have been anybody. It was the fact you don't have to do that, but you do it, and it makes things better for everyone else.
By the way, what goes around comes around. There was a previous guest here on the podcast whose episode's not gone live yet, a chap called Johnny Cooper, and he'll resonate when he listens to this. His moment of giving up being a musician to do what's next was when his car just packed up at some traffic lights, and he called for a mate in a van who basically decanted all the crap in the back of the car and then went off, leaving the car dead at the traffic lights. So it could be the same person.
That'd be amazing, wouldn't it? I'd love that. Yeah.
Could have been Johnny.
Oh, bless him. Maybe it was Johnny Cooper. Yeah. Anyway, and then the second time, so this, that made an impression. And from then on, I was like, oh, I could do that kind of thing. It's very easy. It doesn't take any time or effort. And then years later, I was with a colleague at the Environment Agency, and I'd been tasked with finding out. Actually, I tasked myself because I couldn't work it out. Where does information go inside this enormous organisation? It's like a flow of water that in those sandcastle areas that kids have, and you can kind of in parks, and you can pump the water out.
Oh yes,
and
yes.
then the kids can kind of make dams and stuff like that, and the water just goes everywhere. Well, that's what data seemed to do to me in the Environment Agency. I was like, where is it all? Where's it going? Anyway, let's start at the bottom. Let's start with where it comes from. So I went out with a lady who collected water sampling data. And that's literally chucking a bucket in a lake and then pulling it in and putting it in. Anyway, we're driving along, and she stopped suddenly, and she was like, "Won't be a minute." And she gets out, and the next thing I can see, she's jumped over a fence, and she's kind of wrestling the sheep.
Oh.
She's kind of got like this. And then the sheep struggles for a bit and then runs off. And then she gets back in and kind of wipes her hands, and off she goes. And we're driving again. I said, "I'm sorry, what just happened there?" And she said, she said, "Bloody sheep." And this was in Somerset. She says, "Bloody sheep, they're always falling into the ditch, and they can't get out because they fall onto their backs."
Ah.
And then they're like turtles, they're just stuck. And I was like, "So what, you lifted a fully grown sheep out of a farmer's ditch?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, otherwise it can drown or whatever." I was like, "Well, do you know the farmer?" She's like, "No."
Love that.
And I said, "Why would you?" I said not like why would you do that, but it's more like, why would you do that exactly? And she said, "Well, why wouldn't I do that? That's my job."
Yes.
And it's again, and I was like, that farmer will never know, and
Great thing to put onto your CV, a professional sheep wrestler.
Yeah, sheep wrangler. That's
wrangler.
good, isn't it? Mm.
Wonderful stuff. By the way, I have to curate the journey of this for the UK Health Radio bit. I've got about 3 minutes to go, but stay on because we'll do a postscript which I can put into the Buzzsprout. So forgive me if I get a slight lick on to get this bit up.
Okay.
So can I have a quick, quirky or unusual fact about you we couldn't possibly know until you tell us?
It was me that broke the toaster when I was a kid, and I broke it with a hammer because it was burning the toast and my dad wouldn't replace it. And I knew the only thing to do was to actually physically break the toaster so he would replace it. And I'm really sorry about that, but it was just burning all our toast. Everybody knew it was a problem.
And I'm so happy that this is the moment you confess in the sunshine to being the one who broke.
Feels great.
And your dad has died, so there's not much recourse. Just today. But I like the courage of naming the day. Today is the day when you finally fessed up. So again, forgive me for going slightly quick. We will come back to this. But alchemy and gold now. When you're at purpose and in flow, what are you happiest doing?
So two things. I love talking to people. That's where the time disappears. But there's another, and it's when I'm doing spreadsheets. I'm doing a really good spreadsheet model. The time can fly by, and there's nothing in between. There's just those two.
And I know you've written an essay because I was researching on economics of flood insurance, so that must have involved quite a few databases.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Now listen, we've got to get a lick on because of the length of this conversation. Again, there is a postscript coming, so if you're listening on UK Health Radio, if you want to hear extra bits, go to the Buzzsprout version of this straight afterwards. But when all is said and done, Matt Georges, how would you most like to be remembered? I'm just going to skip the cake just for a moment.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll just give you a quote that I really agree with from a guy, Paul Eddington, who you may know was Jim Hacker in Yes Minister.
Yep.
And he said of his epitaph, "I think I would like my epitaph to be, he did very little harm." And I think that I love that, and that I'd go for that as well.
Matt Georges, he did very little harm. I love that. This is sort of a bit of a false ending, but in terms of curating this part of the journey, Captain's Log Supplemental to be continued within Buzzsprout. But ladies and gentlemen, here on UK Health Radio and in the Buzzsprout, this is Matt Georges. Thank you so much for joining me here on the Good Listening To show, Your Life and Times with me, Chris Grimes. Anything else you'd like to say?
It's been a pleasure, Chris.
And just for now, stay posted. Good night.